Okay, I'm Mustafa from Manor W6, and today I want to talk all about intermittent fasting, specifically 16 and 8 intermittent fasting. So just a little background on fasting. Fasting's been around for thousands of years, a long time in human history. Religions have prescribed fasting for a long time to their followers to achieve kind of spirituality and to achieve like a next level of enlightenment. But now fasting has kind of come into the public eye as a way to lose weight and to manage weight. So obviously being a fitness professional and working in a gym, that's what I'm going to talk about today, how we use intermittent fasting to lose fat. So just in a nutshell, what is intermittent fasting? So intermittent fasting is you don't eat for 16 hours and you have an eating window of 8 hours. It's that simple. There are different types of fasting. So there are water fasts, there's alternate day fasting. I think there's one called the 5 and 2 diet. There's one called warrior diet, which is a form of fasting. We're not talking about any of that. We're only talking specifically about 16 and 8. And I'm gonna go into how to do 16 and 8 a little bit later on. But in terms of the meat and potatoes of it, it's just 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. So who is intermittent fasting for? So the first thing, when I get an overweight client, the first thing I say to them is, have you tried intermittent fasting? And if you are overweight, it's a great place to start. If you're busy, it's a great place to start. And if you need simplicity in your life, it's a great place to start. And if you fit all three of those categories, then you really should try intermittent fasting at some point because it is very effective. And I'll go into why exactly. So in terms of the benefits of intermittent fasting, so as I said, it's my first port of call for overweight people. Reason being, it gives early results and it's quite sustainable. So I've had people who have come to me for like a year ago for training. They've got on intermittent fasting and a year later they're still fasting. It's really sustainable, like it's quite easy to incorporate it into your life, especially if you fall into the aforementioned categories like busy and needing simplicity, as opposed to meal plans and keto diets and this and that, which can work, but I tend to find they require a lot of willpower. Like for me to give you a meal plan, maybe you can do that for 1 month, maybe you can do that for 2 months, but eventually that becomes very difficult to keep up. So intermittent fasting is not really like a rigid diet. It's more kind of a way and a pattern of eating that you can incorporate into your life the way you feel you need to. So that's why I like it. It's really sustainable. It gives you structure, but at the same time it's still flexible. So it gives me structure in the sense that I know from 12 p.m. midday till 8 p.m. I can eat. After that I can't eat. In the morning I can't eat. So in that way, it makes it very simple for me. I know when I can eat and when I can't. But at the same time, it's not so rigid that I'm following an exact meal plan and I'm not allowed to have this food and I'm not allowed to have that food. You can choose to incorporate that into intermittent fasting if you want, but I find that tends to produce a lot of binging and tends to produce a lot of cheating on the diet. So with intermittent fasting, you can still indulge in your favorite foods from time to time as long as you're being sensible the rest of the time. So it's nice in that way. Intermittent fasting also tends to automatically reduce your calorie intake because let's think about it. If you've only got 8 hours to eat, in that 8 hours, you've only got a certain amount of time you can get in the calories. You're probably busy at work, you're probably doing other stuff. Whereas if you're eating from the moment you wake up to the time you go to sleep, there's a little bit more time in there in between for you to be snacking and eating junk food that you shouldn't be eating. So just by virtue of the fact we have an 8 hour window, that will reduce the amount we're eating for most people anyway. Like don't get me wrong, you could still, in that 8 hours, you could still have 4 or 5 meals or 6 meals of junk food. I'm sure you could, but for most people that's not gonna happen. And the crux of weight loss essentially is you've got to take in less calories. So by shrinking that window of eating, you probably will take in less calories. So that's a huge benefit right there. Another one I like for busy people who are usually working at a desk and they've got deadlines to meet, like I train a lot of busy people in this gym. Intermittent fasting tends to increase focus, and there's a hormonal reason behind that, and there's also just a practical reason behind that. So the hormonal reason is that it increases hormones called catecholamines, such as noradrenaline. So it increases your alertness and it increases your focus. So you might be working and you'll be like buzzing, you'll be in the zone. And that's a nice place to be if you've got deadlines to meet and you've got work to do. So that's a really nice side effect. And then the other side effect is that the other way it makes you more focused at work is that you won't be constantly stressing about the next meal and thinking about how you need to prepare your food, etc. It gives you a nice window of time where you can just focus on your important tasks and get stuff done. So I really like it for that. It also stops neuroticism about eating. And this is something very prevalent in fitness and people who start training. I can be like that sometimes. I know a lot of other people are like that. So we're constantly thinking about the next meal. I need to get my next meal at this time. I need to make sure I eat in at this time. And ultimately, we all want to look good and we all want to feel good, but we also want to be able to live our lives a little bit more relaxed and not be so rigid about the way we eat. So intermittent fasting tends to cut that out a little bit. You're able to relax during that 16-hour period. And then once the 8-hour period comes, then we can focus a little bit more on cooking and food and that kind of stuff. All right, so in terms of the how of intermittent fasting, so it's not very rigid, but there are some guidelines that you should follow if you want to make it effective, if you want to manage your weight, if you want to lose weight. So the first one, as we alluded to earlier, is that you fast for 16 hours. And in that 16 hours, sleep is included. So that's good news there. You've got an 8-hour window in which to eat. That does not mean you have to eat for the whole 8 hours. It just means you have the 8 hours available to get your meals and your snacks in. In terms of drinks and liquids, so you can drink during the 16 hours of fasting, but those liquids that you're ingesting need to be 0 calorie. So we're talking water, we're talking tea and coffee without sugar, we're talking 0 calorie soft drinks, although I'm a bit on the edge about them, but they are acceptable during the 16-hour fast. In terms of your meals during the 8 hours of eating, your biggest meal of the day ideally should come after your workout. So the post-workout meal should be the biggest meal of the day, because that is when your body uses the calories in the best way. So it's called calorie partitioning. So if I've just done a good weight training workout and then I eat a large meal after, less of that meal is going to go towards fat and more of it's going to be funneled into the muscles to start the rebuilding process. So that's a really important note that not many people consider when they're fasting. Now, when it comes to weight loss, so if you are intermittent fasting and your aim is to lose fat, very, very important, you need to keep protein high. So I recommend 2 grams per kilogram. So for body weight, if you weigh 70 kilograms, you want about 2 grams of protein per kilogram. So that will come up to 140 grams of protein. That's going to be quite important. Or if you don't like tracking calories, you can just kind of do it the hand method, where if you're a man, you eat 2 palms of protein at each meal. So that could be like 2 pieces of fish that size at each meal. And if you have 3 meals over the course of the day, it should roughly equal there. Maybe a little bit less, you'll have to adjust it. But that is really important. Whenever you are trying to lose weight, protein has got to stay high. In the eating window, I would recommend you try to get at least 2 meals, ideally 3, but that's personal preference. And another thing is, if you're fasting and you're trying to lose weight, lifting is of supreme importance. So you have to keep lifting, because it all goes back to preserving muscle, because once you shed that fat, you need to have some kind of shape you need to have some shape basically. So lifting is very important. That goes hand in hand with the protein requirement. So that is kind of the how. And again, we don't want to be too rigid, but obviously if you're doing it, you want to do it properly. Okay, so in terms of intermittent fasting myths, so the number one prevailing myth about fasting is that it's magic. If you do intermittent fasting, you can eat what the hell you want. You can eat sweets, you can eat ice cream, whatever you want, and you're not going to put on weight. It's absolutely false. At the end of the day, even if you've got an 8-hour window in which to eat, if you're eating 6,000 calories of junk food, then you're still going to get fat. So it's not magic. It does have some really great benefits, but it's not magic by any stretch. So you still need to keep a sensible outlook on your diet. How you approach that diet is up to you, but the main thing is high protein, lots of veggies, and then you decide how you want to eat. High carb, low fat, high fat, low carbs, it's up to you. But you need to be sensible with the diet. And the second myth that's quite prevalent with intermittent fasting is that if you don't eat for 16 hours, you're gonna go catabolic, you're gonna lose all your muscle, you're gonna turn into a skeleton. It's not true. Catabolism doesn't happen that quickly. And if you really wanna be super sure about not losing muscle or anything like that, just make sure in the 8 hours you're getting adequate protein. And you can also sip on BCAAs, I forgot to mention that one. You can have BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, during the fasting period, which will help to keep some. BCAAs are the building blocks of protein, so they'll be floating around in your blood, so you're not gonna turn into Skeletor after 16 hours of fasting. That's another myth. All right, so one of the biggest considerations about intermittent fasting is the time of day you train. So as we said earlier, you have 8 hours in which you can eat. And that 8 hours is not rigid. You can move it forward or you can move it backwards. It just depends on you. So if I want to, I can set my eating window from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Most common is about midday to 8 p.m. That's a nice balance because you can have lunch at work, and then when you go home, you can have a meal with your family or with your wife or your husband or whatever. So that's the most common one, but you can shift this depending on how your life, depending on what your lifestyle is like. But I'm gonna talk from the perspective of where you're training, what time of day you're training. So I've got clients who train at around 6 or 7 in the morning. So let's go through an early session like that. So if your session is at 6 a.m., so before you wake up, you're obviously fasting, you're not eating at this time. You could have 10 grams of a branched chain amino acid powder. And as we said earlier, branched chain amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So that will just have some amino acids floating in your muscles, so that when you do train, you've got some kind of raw materials there to work with, and that will help to build muscle and to preserve muscle, etc. So you have your branched chain amino acid. You'll train at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock. Let's assume your training is an hour. And then up until 12, you're still gonna be fasting. Let's say that you're eating at 12. You're still gonna be fasting, but up until then, you can have 1 or 2 more servings of branched chain amino acids, 10 grams of branched chain amino acids. At 12, you're gonna have your largest meal of the day, because as we said, the post-workout meal should be the largest meal of the day. Yes, it's coming quite a few hours after the workout, but it's still coming after the workout. So we'll put our biggest meal at 12 o'clock. And then we could also have another meal, maybe at 3 or 4 p.m., small meal. And then we can have our last meal at about 8 to 9 p.m. So that there, if we look at 12 or 1, we could break our fast, and then our last meal will be at 8 to 9. So that's if you have an early session. If you train in the afternoon, which a lot of people do, like 3 to 4 p.m. So your first meal will be at 12. You break your fast at 12. You train at 3 to 4 p.m. And then after your training, you'll have your big post-workout meal at about 4 or 4:30, something like that. And then you can have your last meal at 8 p.m. That's a very easy schedule to follow, that you fit in 3 meals there and you worked it around your training. If you like to train in the evening, which a lot of people do because they like to train after work, so again, we break our fast at 12, have our first meal. We can have our pre-workout meal at 4 p.m., 4 to 5 p.m. So when we finish in work, we can have a small meal. We'll go to the gym at around 7 p.m., do our training session, and then we'll come home and we'll have our largest meal of the day at 8 to 9 p.m. and boom, then we just cut it off. So again, I've given kind of ranges for times, 8 to 9 p.m. As I said, you can move it, you could start eating at 12, you could start eating at 1, and then you just adjust it from there 8 hours onwards. So you've got 3 situations there, very common times of training, and you can just work it around that. And I'm sure if your times are different to that, you could adjust it how you want. So some advice in terms of fasting. So first of all, if you've got any medical conditions, i.e. diabetes, you should go and get some medical advice from your doctor first. I would also advise you to start slowly, because we've been used to eating a certain way, expecting food at certain times. So when you cut that out rapidly, you'll start to get hunger pangs, you'll start to feel irritable, you'll start to get hangry. You don't want to have all of that. So what I say is to start really slowly. Maybe you could start with a 12-hour fast. Maybe you could start with a 14-hour fast. Just slowly work it up over the space of a couple of weeks. Maybe you could do 1 or 2 days of fasting and then 1 or 2 days of eating. We just want to take it slowly, but after a couple of weeks, most people are fully adapted. You'll get the very occasional hunger pangs during the fasted period, but after that, you'll be fine. So you won't be starving, you won't be in famine mode. Most people will be fine after a couple of weeks, but just introduce it a little bit slowly. Next piece of advice, use a window that suits you. So as I've been saying for the whole time I've been speaking, this is not rigid. You can adjust it according to your lifestyle. So if you want to move it earlier, move it earlier. You want to move it later, move it later. It's flexible in that way. Work it around your lifestyle. That's the beauty of it. And the last point, which probably contradicts everything I've said so far, is that it might not actually work for you. So if you try it and you can't handle it and you don't like eating within 8 hours and it's just not possible due to your lifestyle, it just might not be for you. But it's one option, and I find it's a very good option. So try it out before you knock it, but it might not be for you. Hey, there are thousands of different diets. One will be for you. Remember, the most important diet, the best diet, is the one that you can actually stick to. So try it, see if it's for you. If it's not, there'll be something else for you. But I hope that helps. And if you've got any questions, feel free to message me on Jump Lift Sprint and my Manor London. Cheers.